My guest today is Kurian Tharakan. Kurian is the founder of the sales and marketing strategy firm StrategyPeak Sales and Marketing Advisors. He's a 27-year veteran of the sales and marketing industry and has consulted for companies in numerous sectors. Kurian is also the author of the Amazon bestseller called The 7 Essential Stories Charismatic Leaders Tell, and it details how anyone can move people and mountains with the power of story. Kurian, welcome to the Go for Launch podcast.
Thanks for having me on, Brandon.
Absolutely. Well, I always start asking my guests, where are you in the world today?
All right. We are in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. So the former hockey home of Wayne Gretzky. So if you like hockey, you'll know who Wayne Gretzky is, right? Yeah. So just a little north of Montana, straight up from Montana.
All right. Well, you know what? There's that epical quote that you don't skate to where the puck was, you skate to where it's going. Yeah. They all attribute that to Gretzky. No one's really sure if he actually said it, but now, of course, he should take credit for that because everybody says that.
He said it when he was probably 14 or 12 or something like that. It was quite insightful at that age.
Exactly. Yeah, and of course, it's like one of those makes complete sense, right? If you're trying to get something done, you head towards the future, where the puck's headed. So we're going to talk about where the puck is headed for storytelling today, among other things. But I want to start, Kurian, with asking you to tell us about your sales background. In other words, how you got started with your own business. And then more importantly, how did you come to embrace storytelling as part of your journey?
Sure. Well, as with most people, I got into sales accidentally. It was, I remember, in a lot of ways, that's true. I didn't go to school to learn to sell. In fact, the university still doesn't have a sales program there, right? They have marketing programs, but really, what do you learn in a 16-hour class? You learn enough to know what the topics are, and that's it. You got to go on the street and do it. But I remember, way back when I was, probably 10 or 11 years old, a teacher seeing me in action at some kind of auction that we had in grade 6 said, "You are a salesperson." Okay, maybe that's what it is. And I remember back in grade 3, I was also doing a little play or something like that, something to do with the audience there. And somebody told me that I was a good storyteller. Right. So, those kind of things stick when you're a young kid, not knowing anything about what that means. Right. But of course, we accidentally get into that, right out of school. I'm 22, 23, got into the computer sales business, sold lots of things, been a lot of different industries over that time. Spent 12 years of my life in the corporate finance business, mergers and acquisitions, raising capital for companies with one of the big 4 accounting firms in time. A good chunk of that time was spent with them. Been in hundreds of boardrooms during that process, right? But what are we doing all that while? We're not talking about corporate finance and the technicalities. We're not talking about computer hardware and its technological advancements. We are telling stories, and we're trying to get people to be able to relate to us in a way that builds familiarity and trust and liking and rapport and those kinds of things. Before any sale can be made, any kind of lasting sales relationship, you got to have that foundation. And there's no better way to build that foundation than to have a common story, a common narrative that we can all agree upon, and we find meaning with it.
That's right. And through the ages, of course, before the internet, lots of people can't remember that, the youngsters who may be listening, but, for the rest of us, things were written, but before that, there was this oral tradition of things that were passed down for centuries. And that was all done by the voice and from people from various cultures around the world telling stories and keeping those stories alive. So it's very gratifying that, we're now getting back to our roots. And so we're going to dive into that a little bit more because the book that you wrote is called The 7 Essential Stories Charismatic Leaders Tell. And Kurian, I looked up the definition of the word charisma. And according to the definition I saw, it is compelling attractiveness or charm that can inspire devotion in others. So we can point to a lot of different leaders throughout history who are charismatic, whether it was Abraham Lincoln, Gandhi, Steve Jobs. These are just a couple that come to mind. But for many of us who consider ourselves ordinary mortals, we may not feel so charismatic. How can storytelling help us get to that level?
Where each of us, first of all, storytelling, the only way we can relate to our world is by the stories we tell. Now, you can't, the facts by themselves mean nothing without meaning infused in it. And when you have meaning infused into a fact, it becomes a truth. Now, and I differentiate that from, what's true. What's true is a fact, but a truth is your individual truth. And that can only be related to by the stories you tell about what that fact has. And, down in the US, you have the Republicans, you have the Democrats, same set of facts, different stories,
Mm,
different meanings, different outcomes, different legislation that results from these kinds of things. Well, why is that? It's because of the narratives that are being, spun around the same set of facts and what they mean. And so when it comes to charisma, where we all can't have that always on constant state of charisma that a Steve Jobs has, or an Abraham Lincoln, as you said. What you do have is a deep sense of passion about something. And in a lot of ways, the charisma comes as a result of the passion and the energy that you infuse something with. And it naturally translates into the story, the way you tell the stories that you tell. And
mm.
so the stories themselves, they can do a large part of the heavy lifting for you when it comes to creating prominence around your brand, whether it's your personal brand, your company brand, product brand, and that can do a heavy part of the lifting. But when you infuse it with your deep belief, okay, and your personal passion for that concept, that's what makes it come alive. And you have no choice but to be charismatic in that process.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people maybe misinterpret charisma as being really vocal and engaging and outgoing and things like this. But some of the most charismatic people I've met are the most soft spoken.
Most soft spoken. And, I was just watching an episode of Miami Vice. You and I probably about the same age. And if you remember the lieutenant on there, Castillo,
Mm,
very quiet spoken, but you paid attention when he was talking because
yeah.
you knew he was being dead serious, right? So that's a charismatic approach. Now, you're listening to me. I'm a little animated. This is the way I talk, right? You don't need that. What you need is a deep belief in the topic that you are talking about. And the charisma is a sense of your passion, deep belief, and purpose around the concept that you're talking.
Correct.
Talking.
And I think if we think back to Lincoln, there's not a lot of recordings of the guy that I know of, but I don't imagine that he was this boisterous person that was screaming and loud. I imagine he was extremely thoughtful, pensive. You look at the pictures of him, the guy looks extremely dour. And I know in his life, in particular, he had a lot of setbacks.
Yeah.
And so a lot of people would look at him and go, he's about the last person on earth you think would rise to that level. But I think maybe another determinant is also just grit, just the ability to grind through. And like you said, stick to your guns about whatever you're passionate about. He was passionate, obviously, about leading this country. He picked a hell of a time to do it, and he was sort of at that moment in history where he rose to the occasion. Um, but I want to kind of segue from that into your book specifically, because you talk about 7 essential stories. So 7 is a magic number throughout history for so
Yeah.
many reasons. But can you?
Cultural constant.
What's that?
The cultural constant in many cultures. It's
Yes,
one of
and
those things that
so
just resonate.
absolutely. So can you break down for us, one by one, what those 7 essential stories are that we need to understand?
Sure. Well, okay. So the book itself is a leadership book, but the opposite side of that same coin is you can translate that to leadership in your marketplace. So one is internal leadership with your internal customers, which are your employees and your people. The external part of that, you can take the same 7 stories and put it into market leadership as well. So it's both an entrepreneurial framework, a business framework, and it's also a leadership framework as well. Okay, so the 7 stories, they are as follows. Very first thing that you will do, and put these 7 stories together into a meta narrative. It's a strategic narrative. And so I don't want you to bore people with the entire telling at the beginning. You might
Yeah.
just choose one of the stories that's resonant with them. And then when they're interested, if they're interested, then you expand into the rest of them. But in order for you to have resonance with your market, you need to tell all 7 of these modules. Number 1, creation and origin.
Mm-hmm.
So how did you start? The very first book in the Bible is the chapter of Genesis.
In the
No,
beginning. Yeah.
in the beginning. That,
Yeah.
and in fact, that's how that chapter opens up. It's
Once
from
upon a
the word
time. Yeah.
once upon a time,
Yeah.
and it's exactly those kinds of things. So why did this start? How did it start? What was the inciting incident? What was the purpose and passion at the beginning? Did you realize that? What were the setbacks? All that kind of stuff. People are really curious about that. If they have any kind of interest in your products and services and brand, they want to know about how did this all start? It's a natural curiosity, right? Story number 2 is our identity, values, and beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
Who are you as people? What are your highest aspirations? What are your highest values? What is important to you? And so if you have, 2 commoditized steel mill factories, they
Mm-hmm.
produce commoditized steel, right? And one believes in environmental concerns and doing what's best for their employees and such, and the other one employs child labor.
Mm.
Right? Those are 2 different values. And if
Sure.
it's a commodity product, which one am I going to gravitate to? I'm going to
Right.
choose the one that's going to most align with my own set of values.
I
So
think of
people,
a company like Patagonia, for example, clothing
yes,
manufacturer, and they stick to their guns and they will cut people off and not make stuff or tell you not buy this thing,
yeah,
if it doesn't align with their values. So it takes
yeah.
a lot of guts to do that.
We are drawn to people that have similar values to us. And, I think one of the biggest things that happened, perhaps in the last 4.5 years, let alone the last year and a half, has been, all these people that you might be with on Facebook as friends with yours, and you see how different your values are with some of them that you had previously thought of as friends.
Yes.
Wow, really? I didn't know you thought that way, right?
Right.
Very intriguing things. And that either brings you closer or draws you apart.
Mm-hmm.
One of those kind of things. So it's one of those things, right? Story number three is the big idea.
Okay.
What's this all about? What's the central unifying concept that you are trying to instill in the minds of your people, in the marketplace? What is the value propositions? A big idea can end up to be value propositions that you are trying to put into the marketplace. And then everything goes out from there. A product or a service, your company's mission, all spring from a big idea.
Mm.
And Google's big idea was to organize the world's information. That's
Right.
the big idea. And then they have multiple, ways to do that. Story number 4 is the enemy we face. And the enemy doesn't have to be a person. It can be a challenge. It might be to fight corruption in the system. So that's not an individual thing, but it's, let's just get rid of graft. But enemies can be everything from, climate change to North Korea, it could be that. And there are different levels of that, but people need to have some polarity in what they are seeing as right and wrong, good and evil, those kinds of things, in order to get them moving in a direction. They really like that clarity, that concreteness of clarity.
Mm-hmm.
Story number 5. This is a big one. It's called the Mighty Winds.
The
And
mighty, say that again.
the Mighty Winds.
Wind.
Yeah.
WIND.
WINDS. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. The mighty
Okay,
wind.
Mighty Winds.
All right. That sounds
Okay.
like a great one. What is that all about?
Well, so this one is all about the idea that every business, every organization is actually a sail ship, not a powerboat. It's a sail ship. Now,
Okay.
sailing's been around for millennia, right? Almost every culture in the world, every civilization in the world has contributed to the art of sailing because it was a necessary means of transport. Now,
Mm-hmm.
here's the thing. There's not one type of sailboat. There's multiple types of sailboats. You used to have freighters that were sail ships, and you have racing vessels, and you have schooners, and they're all for a different purpose. But all of these sail ships need one thing. They need wind.
Mm.
They need wind to power the ship. But the problem most entrepreneurs have is that they build the ship without ascertaining the direction, availability, or power of the wind.
Mm.
And the wind in this concept simply refers to the big macro trends that are in the market, in the environment. Macro trends like societal trends, technological trends, environmental, economic trends, political, legislative. So 6 big trends. And these trends do not care who they enrich or who they destroy. They just are. They're just part of the environment. And
Hmm.
so they create tidal waves of opportunity and tsunamis of destruction in their path. That's just what happens, right? An example I've been using recently has been this idea of by the late 40s, the transistor was well on its way to being invented. So the
Okay.
transistor was a major step forward. Vacuum tubes, no need any further. Now we're going to transistors. By the 60s, we had the semiconductor. By 50s and 60s, late 60s, we had the beginnings of the internet. It was called DARPANET at the beginning. It was a defense initiative,
Yes.
3 universities connected. And now we had those things. So now we have the personal computer then in the 70s, right? Now it's coming together. And then we have the personal computer connected to the internet. And by 1990s, we had the World Wide Web and all this kind of stuff. So here we are in 2020. Where does that leave us? Well, what happened to the IBM Selectric typewriter? Where is that?
It's
In a
at the
museum.
Goodwill down the street where
It's in a museum.
yeah.
But you may be familiar with this as well. But I remember in the 70s walking into a steno pool with all sorts of Selectrics clacking away and transcribing the notes from their bosses, and that's the way it was done. But now everybody types their own memos, or at least edits them. I would not send my term papers out for typing anymore like I did when I was in university, right? I do this all on my own. And so it has absolutely destroyed the IBM Selectric marketplace, and it's created an absolute waves of opportunity for people like Mr. Zuckerberg
Mhm.
and Pierre Midjar and all these kind of people, because now they are multi, if not hundreds of billions of dollars, definitely very, very rich in the grand scheme of things. Tidal waves of
Absolutely.
destruction, tsunamis of opportunity.
Yeah, that I love that. The mighty winds and that whole sailing metaphor is phenomenal. Now we have a couple left though out of the seven, do we not?
Yeah. So now what happens is those first 5 stories are the left side of the equation.
All
They are
right.
the left side of the equation. And so now we have an equal sign. And if all of that's true, if your market and your people believe that, then there's a clear direction that we have to go. And story number 6 is the journey we must undertake.
Okay.
So this is the journey we must undertake. So we're going to go out and say, this is the direction, because this is what, if we stand still, we're going to be destroyed, because the marketplace is continually moving. So we need to move in this direction. And this direction has opportunity. It has, wealth. It has, all these different things that will enrich you in the process. And if it doesn't enrich you, at least it will keep you safe. So because the marketplace is continually changing, because it's a whole concept called strategic drift.
Mm.
And so where the IBM Selectric was a perfect fit at one time, the marketplace kept moving. The technology kept advancing. And so now it becomes, every day that goes by, it becomes less relevant until it is in a museum. So it's the journey we must undertake. And then
Okay.
finally, story number 7 is the why we will win story. So if you have an absolutely instilled the belief in these previous 6 stories in your audience's mind, the why we will win story takes all of them and puts them into a meta narrative, combines all 6 stories into one, with the addition of one more thing. And we add what are known as keystone elements, which ensure you of the win. And so
Okay.
keystone elements from history have been things like superior people, superior technology, superior strategy. God is on our side,
Mm. Yeah,
right?
that's a mighty wind.
We have the moral upper hand, right? You could go and do it the other way. Those are that's the devil. We have to defeat them.
Yes.
So now we have all these kinds of things. So when we take the previous 6 stories, put it into meta narrative with the keystones, that is the final sauce that says, this is why we exist. That's the direction we're going. And this is why we're going to win.
I love all of those. And I just want to repeat what you said because I've been taking notes. So if you're watching this on YouTube, you see me looking down, I've been typing because this is a fascinating conversation. by the way, Kurian, a lot of times I get on these podcasts to interview great folks like yourself, and I don't know where it's going, right? So I'm a learner, and I love learning myself and then helping others learn through this process. So this is why I do it. But you said the 7 steps that I wrote down were the creation and origin story, identity, and which is sort of your values. Third is the big idea. Then the enemy we face, which is where you sort of look into the polarity, like you said, hey, this is the devil we need to conquer or whatever. Then you need to find some mighty wins. You cannot go out today and say, I'm going to start a big horse company, because guess what? People drive cars.
Yeah.
Combustion engine won that battle. So unless you're
Yes.
going to start a little, small little pot business where people can take horseback rides or whatever, you're not going to do a whole lot with horses, for example. And then the journey that we need to undertake is absolutely essential, like you said, and why we will win. And as you were talking, I was thinking of someone like Elon Musk, who's just a poster child for this type of journey now, and certainly the charisma factor, but getting his employees and others to buy into these crazy visions, like we need to, you know, make cars electric because it's better for the environment. And the enemy is combustion engines. We also need to look the fact that the planet's being destroyed, and we possibly need to look to other planets to go live on. So, I mean, these are, you talk about the big idea.
The big
And
idea.
I think for me, that one really resonates because, again, the big idea is great. And a lot of people think they have a big idea, but unless you have these other factors, and I like the fact that you balance 5, it's 5 equals 2. It's not really an equal equation, but those 5 things are so important before you can even say, here's where we're going to go and how we're going to win. So that was really good.
Yeah. Well, the big idea, I'll tell you a very amusing story. And the book that I wrote is full of stories, chock full of stories,
Well,
right?
of course.
And it's a storybook, but it's based in these categories. And so the big idea in that chapter there, the enemy in the 1890s was the horse.
Interesting.
It was the horse. And the horse, was the primary means of transportation for the big cities, right? And the bigger the cities got, the more horses you need. And the more horses you needed, the more horse manure there was,
Bingo.
right? And it was the horse manure crisis of the 1890s. And in fact, one of the world's first urban planning conferences was held in the late 1890s to deal with the horse manure crisis. And they disbanded after, I think, 3 or 4 days because there was no way out. The cities were doomed. There would be 30 feet of horse manure in Manhattan alone.
Wow.
What were you going to do? Not only horse manure, but, everything else as well.
Sure. The smell, the flies, all of it. Yeah.
All of that kind of stuff, right? And so what ended up happening, of course, was that often big ideas are lying in wait. And by the late 1870s, 1880s, the internal combustion engine was well on its way to being useful. Like steam-powered engines and battery engines were part of the 1700s even. Early 1800s. Battery technology was before internal combustion engines, but it never took on widespread adoption because gasoline was so much easier to use. And what ends up happening is that the rail systems take place for urban transit. We've got internal combustion trucks and transport of various kinds. And by the 1910s, 1920s, these are well on its way. You have the Model T, an affordable car. The horses now have suffered a dramatic and calamitous unemployment crisis.
Mm-hmm. Probably to their delight. Now that
probably to their
left.
delight, and you can probably go and get a ride around Central Park now, right? But they're not hauling lumber and goods around the city anymore.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, that, you bring up a good point too throughout this whole conversation. And, I think a lot about this. Entrepreneurs, you come up with that big idea, but from day one, you need to be thinking about how you can become obsolete. And we've seen giant companies in the past, whether it was Blockbuster. You and I remember going to the Blockbuster stores on Friday and Saturday night, looking for the video, can't find the video you want, settling for something else, etc. That was the mode for a long time. Or think about things like Kodak company,
Sure.
they wrote songs about Kodak. Kodachrome, and
Yeah.
how great it was with all the film. And, no one buys film anymore. Only your purest photographers would look for and buy film from a very few sources now. And even Kodak, I read Kurian had the technology early on for digital photography and didn't
They hold
pursue it.
they hold a whack of patents for the
Yeah.
portfolio. They've even licensed it to Apple for one of Apple's cameras at the very
So,
beginning.
yeah. And so, you cannot be too complacent. You can't be too arrogant. You got to really have a lot of humility. And, you don't have to be Elon Musk or Steve Jobs to, think that far in the future, but you do have to be thinking, back to your example with the horses. At that time, a lot of people, they couldn't foresee anything else. Same with, I live in North Carolina where the Wright brothers invented the airplane.
Kitty
Before
Hawk.
they, before they did that, man, no one conceived of humans getting in a vehicle and flying through the air going anywhere.
No, exactly. It's the constantly moving. It's the concept of strategic drift, right? And
Yeah.
standing still is inviting eventual death
Yes.
because the market keeps moving away from you.
So now, I would think about that, for example, as, we look at social media, for example, Facebook is huge, Twitter is huge, some of these platforms, whether it's Snapchat, TikTok, whatever, we have a lot of these tools. But you ask yourself the question, what's next? Something's coming. One of these days, Facebook will not be the big dog. There will be something else. Now, it could be Elon Musk, he's working on brain implants and monkeys and stuff like that. So who knows? I mean, the future will be radically different. Maybe in our lifetimes, we'll see a lot of amazing stuff like flying cars. I keep waiting for that. I know people are working on it.
Well, if you think of somebody who was born in 1900, okay, and maybe a few of them are still alive today. By 1903, you had Kitty Hawk happen. The Wright brothers are up in the air. Well, it was just 66 years later that we were on the moon.
Mm,
And
right.
just 66 years later. So you see the tremendous amount of change that somebody born in 1900 saw by just even 1970, let alone by the year 2000, right? If they lived to
Yeah,
the age of, it would be transformational. It would be seen as magical in the year 1900 that you could be able to do these kind of things. And now we accept it as everyday happenings. And of course you can do that.
definitely. It's interesting you bring that up. One of the allegedly the oldest living person in America recently passed away, and she lived in Charlotte. I didn't even know this,
Okay.
but
Yeah.
her name was Hester, and she was either 115 or 116, depending on
Yeah.
which um, record they went by. But man, I think she was 1902, if I'm remembering correctly, and she had a hell of a life, right? All the things she saw. Anyway, that's a little bit of a digression. But as we wrap up, I want to ask you a couple more questions. What's the number one reason, Kurian, that companies, organizations, or movements fail?
To me, there's only one reason why companies, movements, and organizations fail at the beginning. There's multiple reasons, but the prominent one is their stories fail
Mm,
to be relevant, resonant, functionally relevant, emotionally significant. And when your stories fail, just like the IBM Selectric, there's no longer a market for you. And so this idea of constantly advancing your story, constantly being relevant to that audience that wants to see your story on the big screen. Okay. And all I'm saying is about the products that you develop and such. When your stories fail, your businesses will eventually fail. And it's not a immediate sudden impact failure. It is a slow dying resonance. And what I say is that you have to renew your business probably on a 6 to 8 year timeline in some way. The entire business doesn't have to be transformed, but something has to change in that 6 to 8 years. And the reason I say that is that is the average lifespan of a television sitcom.
mm.
Television situation comedy. Oh, it's all new and it's great and everybody's in it. You can watch a show in the first few years, right? In the middle, it's still good, right? But then it starts to peter out. And if you remember, we're probably about the same age, something like that. What do they call it? Jump
Jump
the
the
shark.
shark.
And that's
I do.
Fonzie Jump the Shark.
Yeah.
And oh my God, the show's done. All
Yeah.
right. When you
Yeah.
have
For
to
the young
rely,
people. Yeah. For young people listening, I think that was Happy Days. And
happy days.
the metaphor was they ran out of ideas after so long that they ended up having to do this big build up for the big character to jump his motorcycle over a tank of sharks. And it was so ridiculous. Everybody said that's where the phrase jump the shark comes from.
Yeah,
So
right.
yeah, like you said, they probably knew it was way past time and they probably should have put it to bed before then, but it
Yeah.
just kind of
But
petered out at the end.
now this implies something though, and what it implies is that you don't have to create brand new products all the time because that's really expensive. What you have to do is continually test stories though, and that's
Hmm.
really easy to do. And the way we do it, I have a digital marketing company I'm part of as well. We run test ads and see
Hmm.
what people are clicking on, right? And we can quickly see in the analytics which big ideas and which narratives have the most lift. And then we
Hmm.
know which direction to take it because that's what the marketplace is telling us is important. And there's
That's
nothing
right.
more important than being customer centric in that way and being data driven.
Absolutely. Well, this has been a really fun conversation. We could continue this for a long time, but I want to direct people where can they learn more about you, Kurian, and also pick up a copy of your book?
Sure. The book is called The 7 Essential Stories Charismatic Leaders Tell, and you can find it on Amazon, no problem. If you come to my website, strategypeak.com, and I'm going to send you a little set of notes for your show notes that you can direct people to. You can download a couple of chapters from the book there. But I'll tell you what, Brandon, for your first 5 listeners, if they email me at my email address, Kurian@strategypeak.com, and tell me that they heard me on your show, I'm going to send them a free Kindle copy.
Nice. All right.
Yeah,
Well, that's Kurian, Kurian at
at strategypeak.com.
strategypeak.com. Yeah. So take advantage of that. All this will be linked over at the show notes page at goforlaunch.io/show 136. Kurian, it has been an absolute pleasure. Like I said, jumped on the call having never met you and feel like we're kindred spirits.
Kindred spirits. I like that.
Yeah. And I love the storytelling aspect, how it applies to branding and marketing and sales. It's just super important to understand. And the 7 steps you outlined were spot on.
Terrific. Brandon, thank you for having me on your show. Had fun.